Hello and welcome to Northern Nightmares, your home for nightmare stories throughout Canada and beyond, and I'm your host Andrew. Today, we head back to the year 2013, where our story takes us to the sleepy town of Lac-Megantic. In the middle of the night, the town would be woken up to the sounds of nightmares, the sounds of fuel cars exploding and leveling everything surrounding the area. This is the tragic tale of the Lac-Megantic Rail Disaster. On July 6, 2013, approximately 1 a.m. in the morning, the MMA-02 freight train was left unattended for the night by its only engineer, Tom Harding. With routine checkup to make sure everything was locked down and all brakes applied, Tom called it a night and left the train. However, unbeknownst to him, this train would be heading out from the station of Knott. This train consisted of a loaded buffer box car, a remote control caboose, and 5 locomotives, all needed to transport the 72 fuel tank cars. These fuel tanks held a highly volatile crude oil which was being transported from North Dakota to St. John's, New Brunswick. After Tom left the station, the train began its descent downhill towards Lac-Megantic. It was parked on a 1.2% grade incline. It's barely noticeable to the naked eye, but I would compare it to a gentle uphill climb. In this case, it was enough for all that weight to start rolling downhill towards the town. About 10 to 15 minutes was all it took the 10,000-pound train to reach the town at a speed of 65 miles per hour, or 101 kilometers. When it reached the town, it derailed from a curve in the tracks, and many of the fuel tanks exploded on impact. The other tanks were punctured, causing millions of liters of oil to spill out. However, with the fire from the explosions, this caused the fuel to ignite, creating a huge ball of fire. The blast radius was at least 1 kilometer, 1/6 of a mile, consuming everything including 36 of the 39 buildings surrounding the area, and unfortunately, ending the lives of 47 people. This incident took over 2 days to extinguish. The initial explosion lasted for hours, and once they stopped, firefighters rushed the area to put out the many fires, which destroyed the downtown area. One of the destroyed buildings was a popular bar called the Musée Cafe, located in the heart of downtown area. This is where the majority of the victims were when the train exploded. The others resided in nearby apartments and in the vicinity of other downtown locations. This was considered the worst tragedy to occur on Canadian soil in over a century. But how all did this happen? If the brakes were all applied, this train shouldn't have moved. But upon further investigation, everything was cleaned up and thoroughly inspected, and the truth was discovered. Let me break down how things are supposed to work on a train, and then I'll explain what really happened. Freight trains use an air brake system. Each car is connected to each other by a brake pipe. The main car fills the entire train with pressurized air, usually about 90 psi. Each car has its own reservoir of compressed air and also a valve that monitors the pressure in the pipe. So when the engineer wants to slow down, the brake handle releases the air from the pipe. The valves on each train detect the drop in pressure and cut the air off from the brake pipe. Next, the air stored in each car's reservoir fills up the brake cylinder, which applies the brake shoes to the wheels. When the engineer wants to release the brake cylinder releases the air and a spring pulls the shoe away. Air flows back in through the main pipe from the car, and then air then fills up each reservoir back up, and the train continues its journey. Now in this case, there are multiple reasons why the incident occurred. After Tom parked the train for the night, he headed to a local hotel to rest before he continued his next shift. This was between 11 and 11:30 p.m. And around 11:30 p.m., firefighters were called to the scene because a fire broke out in the lead train. The firefighters extinguished the blaze and shut down the engine. However, in doing this, the train lost its brake pressure and it began its descent downhill. Transportation Safety Board of Canada concluded that between 17 and 26 handbrakes should have been applied, and it was determined only 14 would be needed to secure the train. However, Tom only applied 7 of those handbrakes, and they were only on the locomotives, not the fuel cars. A proper brake test wasn't even performed after they were applied. Now, Tom was an experienced engineer, but this was a lack of care, and to his lazy effort, this led to the train's destruction. Also, for the engine fire, get ready for this. 8 months prior, it went in for engine failure. With pressure from the company MMA, Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Railway, the train was not properly repaired because they wanted to avoid high costs and was fixed with an epoxy-like material. This material was known for its lack of strength and durability, which caused the engine to produce black and white smoke, and oil was known to leak into the turbocharger. This is what caused the fire prior to the derailment. And before Tom left, he contacted his supervisor before leaving. He made it aware that the train was producing the smoke and reported engine making noises. Simply put, though, it was ignored and Tom was sent away to end his shift. Next, let me tell you about the oil they were transporting as well, because things just get worse. Dangerous chemicals like this are classified in a system called the packing group. For this fuel, it was a packing group 3, or a low risk class 3. All this means is the fuel has a less likely chance of igniting instantly and generally having a flash point between 23 and 60 degrees Celsius. So if this fuel has a less likely chance of exploding, why in this case did that happen? Haha, well, let me tell you what I think is the best part of the story. In actuality, the fuel that was being transported was not a packing group 3, but a 2. So if the fuel was actually a class 3, we probably wouldn't have had the destruction. But because MMA lied, we ended up with the horrors that rocked this small town. The train used a DOT 111 fuel car, which was known to be durable in a case of a puncture if it contained a low-risk chemical. But because this was a highly volatile fuel, it couldn't withstand the reaction from it. So we have improper fuel cars, mislabeled documents, major engine problems, an engineer that should have followed safety concerns better, and a company whose focus was just making money. So who do we have to blame for all this? Well, let's dive into that. First, there were 3 accused employees that were considered scapegoats by the company for this perfect shitstorm that MMA had tried to blame. Thomas Harding, the engineer, Richard Lebrier, the traffic controller, and Jean D. Mattier, the manager of train operations. Thomas was blamed for not applying enough handbrakes, and the other 2 were blamed for not ensuring the train's safety. Now, the whole trial for this incident has gone on for over a decade. In May 2014, Quebec prosecutors charged the 3 men of 47 counts of criminal negligence for the deaths of 47 people. In April 2015, all 3 men pleaded not guilty for the charge. It wasn't until another 2 more years in October 2017 that the criminal trial would begin in Quebec, and then as of January 2018, all 3 were acquitted by the jury of all charges. Now, I believe they were all guilty regardless. Sure, they didn't murder anyone, but they should have at least been charged with manslaughter. And now, let's talk about the real villains here. MMA. Because after all these 3 men were found innocent, they were fired. But MMA didn't get away from all this. The courts were gunning for them. In August 2013, MMA and its Canadian subsidiary filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy and protection under the company's Creditors Arrangement Act. Later that year, all their assets were sold off to an auction for a grand total of $15.85 million. Also, the companies involved with this paid $460 million in compensation to the victims and their families and all the damage done to their town. However, one company refused to pay, Canadian Pacific Railway. How CP fits into this story is because they already knew that MMA was known to be lax in safety procedures. They knew they were an unreputable company, but cost was cheap and CP trusted them to supply the fuel. The lower courts deemed CP just as responsible and could have prevented this if they just looked into the safety concerns before the trains left. CP's own trial lasted until February 2025, and it was here that the higher Quebec court dismissed the case, stating CP had no legal responsibility for the tragedy. So what happened to Lac-Megantic after this tragedy? Well, the downtown core was rebuilt with the help of locals and support from all over the country. Apartments were rebuilt, a library that got destroyed was rebuilt, and many books were donated. Also, Musée Cafe was temporarily rebuilt, which hosted a lot of musical events to fundraise money to help out with the town. Also in 2023, it was announced that a bypass would be built so that future trains containing dangerous goods would avoid the town. Hopefully, a tragedy like this would never happen again. And this is the story of the Lac-Megantic Rail Disaster. My heart goes out to all the victims and their families that suffered from this event. I can't imagine what it would be like to have to wake up to such a scene. Nightmares aren't always killers or monsters, but man-made creations that are treated poorly. Next week, I'll have a huge story involving another Canadian serial killer. This story is going to be a gross and disgusting tale. Not like the Armin Meiwes cannibalism story I brought you a couple weeks ago. But this story is taking us all the ways to the west coast of Canada. And this story involves pigs. But that's the only little tease I'll give you for now. So I'll see you soon. Sweet dreams, and remember, nightmares are closer than you think.